Välkommen alla sammen. Today we are speaking about Sigrblot, the victory blot, and what the sources say about that. It's coming up just next week, and there are, as usual, people just making things up about this, so today I'm going to speak about what the sources say and clear some of these things up. It's really not a whole lot, unfortunately. Just so you get an idea, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of mentions in the old texts about the festivities around the Julblot or Vetternatter, for example, those holidays. But there are only 2 mentions in all the Old Norse sagas about the festivities welcoming the summer, which we call Sigrblot. And I'll tell you why in just a minute, but first let's just get the dates right. So remember, the Norse only had 2 seasons, summer and winter, and their holidays were all based around the full moon. So the first day of winter, which was also their new year, was October 31st this last year. So do the math, fast forward 6 full moons, and this brings us to the 26th of April this month. Full moons, they're a bit late this year, so historically it could have been anywhere from like early April-ish to maybe even early May. And that's the start of the summer in the Norse world. And ancient Anglo-Saxon sources also confirms this as well. They mention pagan rituals in April to welcome the summer, and then there were no more until September, actually. So definitely a lot of people relate Sigrblot to the summer solstice, but it was definitely in April at the start of the summer, and that's when this offering was in the Norse and Anglo-Saxon and probably all the other Germanic places in the ancient world. So this is a good date for all of us to observe if we want to do that. Then it was also a very, very special time of year. After a long struggle of winter, it's important to understand. Someone from the southern parts of the world, they may not understand this. Even us Scandinavians in the modern day, with our technology and heating and insulation and the supermarkets importing goods from elsewhere in the world, we don't really fully understand how important this time of year was for our ancestors. It was when everything in nature came back to life, when it was all reborn, and this is the time where Balder comes back to life in our myths. That's what it represents. I did videos on that if you would like to see. Anyway, on to the sources. First and most famous is in Heimskringla, Ynglinga Saga section, and this is really the only text that actually gives a name to this holiday, Sigrblot. And it was a sacrifice made to victory, and it appears to be very ancient that Odin brought this custom with him from Åsaland, which was in Heimskringla around the time when Jesus was born, when he lived. So it was probably much older than that, this tradition. Next source is also in the Heimskringla, and it just confirms kind of what we already know here, not giving us too much more information. But the cool thing here is that it tells us about a region of 4 tribes, basically. So a few hundred people at least, but only 12 of these people in total knew and understood the blood offerings that were done. So it kind of gives us the idea of the function of the religious leaders at this time. Then the third source we'll mention is Olav Tryggvason's saga, the biggest bastard of a king we ever had in Norway. So this story basically tells us how he was trying to make peace with an army of pagan Norwegians, but also trying to convert them to Christianity at the same time. And they were not having any of it, and they were about to get into a fight. But then, in order to make peace, King Olav walks back on his words. He says, no, hold on, time out. I want to be friends again. Why don't you guys show me your largest blot so I can see how you worship? And then they organized a midsummer blot. This one was specifically happening in sometime in the middle of the summer, and it's the only source that we have of blot or offering taking place in the middle of the summer instead of April. But this seems kind of like an off occasion, of course, where they organized this blot for the sake of peace and diplomacy. But a blot in midsummer was not the norm. It would have been at the start of their summer, which would have been April-ish time. So that's it for the sources. Maybe I'll mention one more, since we have so few about this blot. It really doesn't tell us how to do it or to what deity, but in some other texts account of the gods that should be sacrificed depending on what the different purposes were. And Adam of Bremen writes, basically a sacrifice is made to Wotan if there is war. So this is Odin. And this is basically accounts to a victory blot, pretty much. The account and description of the blot in March in Uppsala, where Adam of Bremen wrote in this source, they like to combine all of their blots into one big blot per year, it seems. That's the way it was done in Sweden. But for other parts of the Germanic world, there was definitely a blot in April-ish time for victory, and Odin would be the god who the offering was made to, most likely. So unfortunately, that's about all the information we have. No more information is given about how to do it. This is by far the least attested of any blot in Germanic paganism, and the reason is pretty clear when you think about it. This blot was done for victory, don't forget. Sigrblot is what it was called. And remember, all of our texts were written by Christians, pretty much. The Christians that were trying to convert the pagan Norse. So the Christians, they would sure as hell not have wanted the pagans to be doing a blot for victory. These were their enemies. They would have had no problem with pagans doing a blot for a good harvest or warding off a plague, for example, like they do at other times a year. There are many mentions of these types of blots in the text, but to give a blot for your opposing force so that they could have victory, that's not something that you would want people to know about. So they didn't write it down as much as they did the other blots. So yes, absolutely, I do think Sigrblot was one of the most important yearly rituals in paganism, even though we don't really have much written sources to reflect it. As I mentioned, there are no sources about how to do this. So of course we have to reconstruct a lot of these things if we want to do it in the most accurate way possible today, and that's what I'm doing. I'll be making a video of my Sigrblot next week and the way I practice. If you guys are looking for ideas, you can check out my playlist of what the sources say about blots and how to practice them as historically accurate as possible. But that's all I'll say for this video here. Hope you enjoyed. Vi ses nästa gång.